Hello and welcome to Using Project Management Techniques in Your VISTA Assignment. I'm Andy King with the Corporation for National and Community Service, coming to you from VISTA headquarters in Washington, D.C. I'll be your host for today's session. Also joining us is Sam Graziani from JBS. She'll be managing our WebEx technology along with Joanne Lau from Education Northwest. You'll see all of us in the chat and the Q&A during the session to help address your questions and solve any technical problems that you might have. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our main speakers for today. We're delighted to have with us Dr. Erin Barnhart. Dr. Barnhart is the founder and president of Effective Altruism, LLC, as well as a Service Corps Program Director with NeighborWorks Umpqua. Erin serves on the Board of Directors for the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, on the Oregon Committee on Volunteerism, and as an online instructor for the AmeriCorps VISTA Blend courses. She teaches a section on volunteer mobilization. And Erin is an adjunct professor at the University of Oregon. Best of all, Erin is an AmeriCorps and CCC alumna. Our second speaker today is Bethany DeSoblin. Bethany administers the VISTA Blend online course program, and she coordinates a series of webinars for VISTA members in her role at Education Northwest, where she has managed several other projects, mainly through agreements with the Corporation for National and Community Service. Best thing about Bethany, well, out of the many great things, I'll add that Bethany is a former AmeriCorps state member, and she's currently based in Portland, Oregon. Later on in today's session, you're going to get to hear from one of your peers. Dakota Reihl is an AmeriCorps VISTA member serving with Bethany Christian Services in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dakota has graciously joined us today to talk a little bit about her experience and how she is applying project management principles in her service as a VISTA. So we'll hear from Dakota in just a bit. Let's see, in today's session, we hope that you'll be able to, first of all, identify key terminology, phrases, and tools that are part of a traditional project management model. We also hope that you'll know how to access project management tools, resources, and websites that can support your own project management needs. And third, that you'll apply project management techniques to your VISTA activities. So it's not just something that you're learning, but that you will actually put it to use in your VISTA service. So those are our three goals for today's session. And so now I'm going to ask that we turn our chat conversation back to the session at hand here. And you'll see on the screen there's a question for you. We'd love to hear from you. What are some examples of projects that you are either currently overseeing or that you soon will oversee within your VISTA role? It could be a long-term project or a short-term project. So use the chat. Again, if you don't see the chat window, look in the upper right and click on that speech bubble. The chat will open. Make sure that you send your chat response to all participants so that all your colleagues will be able to see it. And we've got a great number of responses coming in. We've got a lot of people on today's session, so thank you all for joining. So I see a few things here around strategic planning and overall project planning. Some other specifics about the individual VISTA project that you're serving with, whether it's events or services to clients. Let's see, grant writing. A number of you, of course, are doing resource development work, and so grant writing or fundraising event planning is part of that, and certainly project management can be useful for that. Some of you are just looking for overall management of your whole year, your whole service year, viewing that as a project. So a lot of great responses here. So it looks like all of you came with a very clear idea of what it is that you're trying to do and how you think that this webinar will be able to support you in that. So thank you for all of your responses. It looks like we've got a great and really a receptive audience for this session. So now I'm going to turn things over to our main speakers, and we'll kick it off with Dr. Erin Barnhart. Erin?
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm enjoying reading the chat and seeing the sheer breadth and depth of projects that folks are going to be working on. Teaching the classes with VISTA Blend, I've definitely seen that you guys are very busy folks, so we hope that the webinar today is going to give you some great tools and strategies to manage the many spinning plates that you all have. I also enjoyed your commentary on our smooth jazz that we offer during the intro. We only pick the best for VISTA. So before we dive in too deep today, I want to acknowledge that project management as a topic is very vast. There are entire institutes and certifications dedicated to this field. So we're going to spend today's call focused on some of the foundational basics. We'll give you an overview of tools and strategies that we think should be immediately useful as you work on your VAD. Since we will be just scratching the surface, though, we're also going to give you some links to explore at the end to learn more. So hopefully you'll walk away from today with a good foundational understanding of project management and how you might use it at your site. Okay, so let's get started. Per the Project Management Institute, projects are defined as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Further, they define project management as the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. Historically, project management grew from the fields of construction, engineering, and defense. And the founding fathers are considered to be Henry Gantt, who is inventor of the Gantt Chart, which we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as Henri Favol, which my French is terrible, so I apologize to Henri if I got his name wrong, but he defined the 5 areas of project management that we're going to also discuss on this webinar. Multiple models of project management do exist, but today we're going to focus specifically on what is called the traditional model. And while each model uses different strategies for managing projects, many core components are shared throughout, including a focus on key goals and a vision for success, a timeline that determines and drives each step of the process, and the importance of determining roles and responsibilities for the actors in the process, as well as the assignment of resources to each step of the process. So my partner in crime, Bethany, is now going to discuss some of the potential constraints of project management. So I'll pass the mic to her.
Thanks so much, Erin. I'm also really happy to be here, and I'm hopefully that you can get some good information out of this webinar today, at least to start the process. I noticed as well that a lot of you have some really, pretty large, detailed projects that you have in front of you this year, and so if we can just even provide you with some foundational stuff, I feel really good about that. So before we go into the discussion of the phases that Erin mentioned that I think that can be applied to any project, I wanted to touch on one important consideration. So you'll see on the screen is what we call the triple constraint triangle, and it basically it posits that projects are carried out under certain constraints, and those are projects must be delivered within cost, projects must be delivered on time, and projects must meet the agreed scope, no more, no less. So this visual is interesting and something that project managers often keep in mind because it's a pictorial representation of the key attributes, and that essentially if a project manager, if any one of these things changes, then if there's a change in any one of these 3 items, then you effectively have to change one or the other, altering the other side of it. So in effect, you're trying to keep these 3 things in balance. And just to kind of walk in here with some basic understanding of those 3 things, even though they may seem quite very basic definitions, but the times referred to actual time required to produce a deliverable or to meet your end goal or the end result of the project. You'll find that a particular activity requires more time to complete. You'll have to adjust the other components to meet that. this is, the cost is the estimation of the amount of time that it will be required to complete the project. And so costs encompass, as you can imagine, various things. So resources, labor rates, those, if it takes more time to do something, it's going to cost more. You may be hiring contractors. You may have to have some risks that come up that you need to deal with, and that's a cost, materials, and et cetera. So all aspects of the project that have a monetary component are part of this cost structure. Then the third one is the scope, and that's the functional elements that, when completed, make up the end deliverable for the project. So that's really where you're, what you're trying to do. And again, no more, no less. You're just trying to accomplish what you set out to do.
Thank you, Bethany. So for the purposes of today's webinar, we're focusing again on the traditional project management model. Specifically, we're going to look at each of the 5 stages of this model and explore some of the tools and practices you might be able to use to apply this to your VISTA work. And the 5 stages of traditional project management are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and then lastly, closing. So we're going to start off with that first phase, which is initiating. Now, during the initiating phase, you are determining the nature, scope, and scale of your project. How small or big will it be? How long will it take? When does it need to be completed? This is where you're going to determine your timeline. You're also determining the goals of your project, including crafting a vision of what a successful project might look like. What in your mind's eye would success look like? How would you know if you succeeded? Literally describe the vision of what that would mean. And in addition, you're brainstorming the needs of the project as well as your available resources. And those resources could be human resources, financial, tools, et cetera, whatever you have at your disposal. What is your budget? What do you need to meet this budget? Who is on your team? What skills do they bring? And what other kinds of assets do you have and need? For example, tools, space, et cetera.
So what we're going to do here, just to sort of set this up a little bit, is that there are a number of tools that you could employ during the various stages and phases of project management. I'm just highlighting a few that I think are pretty accessible, and that we're going to be giving you some links throughout so that you can actually use some of the templates that I've come across. So just to start out in the initiating phase, stakeholder analysis is an important phase, and that's, Aaron's kind of summarizing this, but for instance, stakeholders are the people who are affected by or have an interest in the project. So this includes clients, management at all levels, project team members, budget people, users of the project, volunteers, and so on. So anybody who's really going to kind of experience the outcome of your project. And within the stakeholder analysis, you really identify the people and then sort of analyze what their needs, wants, concerns, and interests are. And most importantly, you try to figure out how each one defines success. So, this can obviously be a very involved process, but you even just kind of taking an initial stab at this can really help in the end. And so having a chance to talk to the stakeholders or interview them is definitely a great idea if you can do that. And it's a great way to surface the assumptions from stakeholders. I mean, the point here is to really get a good sense of what people want and what's the definition of success, and so that you can really get there. So setting the stage. Additionally, you'll want to go through a process where you try to define the project, provide rationale at a high-level view. So this will be something you'll use to gain agreement from the deciders so that everyone's on the same page. This is called the project charter, and it acknowledges the existence of the project and essentially lists the high-level project info like the purpose, the justification, the objectives, high-level requirements, summary, roles, and responsibilities of each member of the team. Next, there's a scope statement, which essentially drills down a little bit more. By the way, the project charter is usually sort of like 1 page long and contains, basic rationale, and then again, you're gonna drill down with the scope statement. and it really defines the major objectives of the project, what will be delivered, and it's a closer look at these. We're going to take a closer look at these two on the next slide so you can kind of do a little comparison between the two. I mean, you know, sort of the overall idea here is that you're really coming up with, you know, getting something in writing, everybody can see it, and you know where you're going. The project charter, again, is very high level with an initial description. It's pretty early in the scheme of things and provides a snapshot of the major aspects of the project. So, for instance, there's a summary of the schedule, some major milestones, but not every single date that you would get down to a little later. And then this is also, there's also a place on this one where the decider is named, and the people who make the decisions and have the final approval is in the charter. The project scope statement is, again, diving down deeper. How far are you going to go? What deliverables at the end and along the way are we going to be creating? You're also going to start listing things like project assumptions or things you know to be true about the project that you'll have to take into account when planning. And you'll start to flesh out restrictions related to the triple constraints we talked about in the previous slide. Depending on your needs and how much you already know about the project, it might be more practical just to merge the components of these two and set one document for this initiating step. Sam's going to paste in a link to some of the templates that I'm talking about here, so you can kind of download them. They're from an organization that another colleague of mine did a couple-day. I think it might be financially out of reach for people, but they do have their resources available that you can take and use for free. So, okay. So I think what Erin and I thought might be helpful is for this presentation, we wanted to kind of walk through a case study and, introduce the project and then talk through a few of the steps and the tools we might use to help us out. So we've come up with a project, just sort of a very, basic. Obviously, many of you are handling stuff at a higher level projects, but a colleague of mine recently had a situation where he's building a fence between him and the other neighbor, and it was amazing how many aspects of it went crazy, and so anyway, but the great place to start is the description. So we want to get a 20 by 20 foot wood fence to keep the dog in the yard. This dog is a new dog that we've gotten and needs an enclosed space. So the requirements are the features and deliverables are that we want the fence to be a certain height, 6 foot high. It needs to be structurally sound. So a certain number of posts need to be put in place to support the fence size. And so this is a physical job, and it requires effective use of tools and supplies. The object or criteria for success is a finished, sturdy fence with a gate to the front yard. The constraints or restrictions of time, resources, and scope would include that we'll need to get this fence done before winter weather comes, before the ground freezes, and within a certain budget. So because our fence will also run along property lines, it has an impact to the two neighbors on each side and behind, and they'll need to be involved in the process. So you can see as the stakeholders kind of grow, there are stakeholders in each situation, and it kind of changes throughout. So, and then the assumptions and the truth, or the assumptions is that the fence will meet the needs and keep the dog from running away. So that's kind of an example for us to work through, and Erin's going to pick up the next phase.
Great, and just a quick meta comment. I was watching the chat while Bethany was talking, and I know that folks have some specific questions. We are providing a pretty broad overview from start to finish, and then we have a big chunk of time at the end for questions. So please hold on to those because we will come back to them. Okay, so let's talk about planning. Once you have a clear idea of your goals, necessary timeline, and your available resources, it is time to create a plan for your project. First step is to craft a specific timeline for meeting your goals. And here, don't forget to build in more time than you think you will need. Everything, and I do mean everything, takes longer than you think it will. And you will need to make sure that there is time for such things as, for you guys, supervisor review and approval before you can move forward with various steps. And actually, that's not specific just to you guys, but you might not need to do that in building a fence, but you will with planning an event, launching a volunteer program, any of the many things that folks do at VISTA sites. Your next step is to identify your team. Who's going to do this work? What skills and talents are necessary? Who is available? And who will lead the effort? Based on your goals, you then want to think about key tasks and deliverables. Think of these as your signposts in the road on the way to project success. What needs to happen and in what order? How can you confirm progress as you go? For example, tasks and deliverables for developing a volunteer program for your organization might include meeting with staff to identify volunteer needs, designing a volunteer application form, writing a volunteer handbook, identifying potential recruitment partners. You get the idea. What you want to do here is be very thorough. You want to plan and be as prepared as possible for every single thing that needs to happen in order for you to have a successful project. During this planning phase, identifying risks and then planning to mitigate those risks through contingency planning is also important. Here you should be asking yourself, what is likely to go wrong? What things might be out of your control? Assuming something will go wrong, for each element in the plan, develop then what you will do if that element gets off track, and what to do if several things get off track. And then next, you're going to take a look at your resources and needs. What are your costs? What assets do you have available? Again, this can be human resources like team member time and skills, as well as financial resources like cash and assets like computers, transportation, etc. And once you have your timeline, your team, and your deliverables, you can start to assign them, A, to specific dates, and B, to specific partners. Who needs to do this work? When does it need to be completed? Again, build in that extra time all around for unexpected complications and delays. Next, develop your schedule. There are many great tools that you can use to track progress towards your project. One of my favorite free and easy tools is Google Docs, and we're going to show you an example of this later in the webinar. You can actually customize a Google spreadsheet using columns, rows, and colors to track who is doing what by when. There are also many different project management tools designed specifically for tracking progress, and again, we're going to discuss some of these later in the webinar. Last but most certainly not least, make sure you get approval from your supervisor before you get started. Go over your entire plan with them, from goals and vision to the tools you'll use to manage progress, and make sure you're on the same page. Once you have approval to get started, you'll be ready to move on to the next phase.
So as Erin really emphasized here, you'll want to try to get those tasks identified early on so that you don't miss anything and that you can get them assigned. So one possible tool that may or may not work for you, it just kind of depends on what you like, is a mind map. And many of you are familiar with this, but it helps you identify the many tasks associated with the project. It's very visual, and it's used to visually organize information. So the project name is put in the middle, and each branch is a main piece of the project. And it helps you get out all of the things that need to be done. And there could be an entire webinar on mind mapping, of course, but just to get your mind thinking about that. And that's very, there's lots of mind mapping tools out there. I'm simplifying it very much right here, but definitely if that sounds like something you want to do, the right way to do it for you, then definitely check that out. You'll also, as Erin mentioned, you'll want to complete a risk analysis, asking yourself what's likely to go wrong, what's out of your control, and consider the probability of things happening and the impact it could have on the project. So you'll want to consider risks associated with requirements, team interactions, stakeholders, and assumptions. We just want to plant the seed to direct you to some resources so you can bone up on the process. And then earlier, Erin mentioned the Gantt chart. So Gantt charts are graphical representations of the duration that tasks against the progression of time. And we're gonna just take a quick look at one, and you guys may also be familiar with this. You maybe have been part of a Gantt chart or put in a Gantt chart. So these are useful for planning and scheduling in projects and are used throughout the monitoring phase of a project's progress. So they do double duty, as I've found, as a communication tool with team members it's an important thing that gets surfaced on a Gantt chart are dependencies. This is when one task is dependent upon being completed after another task. So in other words, a dependent task is one that cannot begin until its predecessor tasks are completed. In our fence example, one dependency is that the posts need to go in first before you can build the fence part that goes up and down. I'm like losing my words right now. And if we were replacing the fence, for instance, the old one would need to be removed before we could put in the new one. So you get the idea of that's a very simple version of a dependency, but every project has those, and you know, often in case of you're building a training or you're building an online module, there's the role that the developer plays, there's the role that the curriculum folks play, and you have to have the curriculum done before you can put that in the system. So just a couple examples there. And Gantts are really helpful if you have multiple projects, which I know several people noted in the thing that they have several projects going on at the same time. So this is if you're really can get comfortable with using technology, it's a good way to highlight some of the stuff that you need to do each week and that other folks need to do to keep on top of things.
Okay, so let's take a look again at our case study of building a fence. Here's an example of how you would identify and analyze the risks associated with the fence project. So the two columns on the right are where you'd assign a rating, in this case 1 being low and 5 being high to each risk. This value assignment gives these risks credibility and visibility. And often it's a good idea to get your team together to discuss the risks collectively and make decisions about how to proceed. As a project manager, your key role is to identify, track, and communicate these issues throughout the life of the project. Now, there are many other tools that project managers use to track these risks, but for the purposes of this webinar, we want you to begin thinking about how this step could be part of your project management work as VISTAs. So in this case, we've gone ahead and brainstormed a few risks and plotted them in this chart and started to think about ways to respond to the risks. So difficulty reaching agreement on the fence with the neighbors. There's a probability of 2, fairly low, but the impact could be really high. If we can't come to an agreement, we can't build a fence. So the description is we have several neighbors sharing a fence line, so getting agreement from all of them on the size, materials, yard access, et cetera, is critical. And the risk response is to discuss with all parties and gain agreement before starting. Similarly, there's the risk that someone might get hurt building the fence. Hopefully a low probability, but the impact would be high. Someone could hurt themselves falling off a ladder or pounding nails, lifting heavy materials, other injuries. So our response to that risk is to create a safety plan or hire someone to build the fence who has insurance. So again, thinking these through helps us to identify additional steps we might need to take to make our project happen. Additional risks that we didn't list here could be finding out if property lines are correct or dealing with bad weather that could put off the project steps that are dependent on previous steps, slowing down the whole process. So once we have a plan in place, we are ready for the execution phase. We have approval from our supervisor, the plan looks good, we're ready to go. So here we're going to use our timeline and our tools to complete our tasks by the dates identified. And as we do this, we're going to simultaneously go into the next phase in a moment, but first we're going to evaluate as we go, which means what is working, what isn't. We're going to need to adjust our plan as needed as new inevitable complications and issues arise. As you're going through this, be sure to communicate with your supervisor, your partners, and with other stakeholders so that there is transparency to your process. Keep everyone informed of how things are going, both successes and challenges, so that it's truly a team effort. So as I mentioned, while you're executing your plan, you are also monitoring and controlling. And this means managing your timelines, your budget, your relationship with your partners, et cetera. You're assessing and addressing any risks and challenges that arise, and you're communicating with everyone involved, from active partners to funders to stakeholders like board members and your supervisor, and evaluating your results as you go. Are you still on track to meet your goal? If not, what do you need to do to get back on track? Use your milestones and calendar checkpoints to evaluate and take stock as you go, and be sure to keep measuring your success against your original goals. Are we still on track? This is also the place where you're going to make adjustments to your timeline should one of your planning elements get behind schedule. Take a look at your sequencing and your dependencies, as well as that overall timeline, and assess how best to respond. Can you potentially speed up in another area? Will you need more time overall? Again, hopefully you've built in extra time, so this is where you'll put it to good use. Don't forget to also think about how these changes in timing and tasks might affect your resources. You may need to go back to your supervisor to discuss the need for additional time or other assets, so do keep this in mind.
I would imagine that you're starting to see that there's sort of it's just a balancing process here. Things are changing, things are moving. So similarly to what Aaron was talking about, there's this communication plan. So some highly structured workplaces use risk logging, change request forms, and those kind of things. But I'm going to really highlight here that the communication, setting up a communication plan is pretty important. And this is really kind of the meat of, this is related to the monitoring and executing part of the plan. So a communication plan is a written document defining who needs to know what information, how often, and by what means. So each stakeholder may have a different need to know and preferences for how that communication needs to take place. You'll want to make sure that your communication plan is understood to be a living document. We know that people in curriculum know that a living document is just often what's happening. And it will most likely be altered and adjusted to suit the changing needs of the stakeholders at various times in the project cycle. So your plan may be to meet more during one phase of the plan and less frequently during another phase. It may have different players in one phase than the next phase. Also, your communication plan should involve each person or party in its creation. So similarly to sort of the, setting things up at the beginning, you want people to have involvement, and they want to know where they fit in this piece. And, you'll be asking questions like, what would be the best way for us to work together? What information do you need from me? What's your preferred mode of communication? What kind of reminders, if any, do you need? Or does the meeting invite on your calendar suffice? So, or can they just look at the Gantt chart and identify for themselves what their tasks are? You'll notice that people have different styles and different, sort of responses to deadlines. And some people wait till the last minute, and is that going to be okay? And if so, do you need to maybe add a little bit more time into the timeline to accomplish what you need to accomplish? So just like anything else that involves people in its creation, it builds ownership and commitment. So again, we want to be involved in the discussion, and we want to know how we're part of this process. And, to be respected. Communication is really a way to respect people in that process. So also another tool, so during this phase, you're going to want to have status meetings. And so, these go by basic names, but these take on different forms, and they basically keep the work moving. There could be days worth of webinars on running meetings well, and best practices, guidelines, and roles, et cetera. But for this brief introduction, it's important to know that the different purposes of the meeting you hold during this execution and monitoring phase might involve you trying to solve a problem that's come up, or maybe you need to gather together to agree on a decision. Maybe you want to brainstorm with the whole group, or maybe you're just aiming to meet to communicate with each other and report on how things are going, or to get feedback. So some meetings may be done via conference call, just with people being located at a distance often. This can be accomplished quite easily, and definitely people start to become more familiar with, using WebEx or conference call thing to accomplish those meetings. So, and then a third tool or task, which is something that I use on a daily basis almost anymore, is weekly planning. So it's sort of setting aside an hour to an hour and a half, or maybe, maybe you'll get more efficient at it depending on the number of projects that you have. It's a time to check your Gantt chart, your calendar, other tools that you use to track tasks. So you'll have to constantly review the responsibilities and then reprioritize them. I often move things from a list to say, this is the stuff I have to get done today, or these are the things I need to get done this week. I need to check in with these people to make sure they're on task. So it's a little bit of a kind of a hovering role where you're checking in on people and making sure things are moving. And then sort of scheduling the blocks of time in your schedule to actually accomplish the things that you have on your list. So the next one, back to our case study, here's an example of a communication planning tool. So you do spend some time identifying the role each stakeholder plays and what they need to be informed about or to give input on. This will change, but as we look at this in the beginning phases of things, we have the spouse who is involved in this process, and they are deciding, they're sharing the role in the process. They may be covering for you because you have to go to work, and they'll meet the contractor. They may be gathering bids. They're involved in decisions about financial decisions. Then you kind of plot out what they need to know, what they need to be apprised of. In this case, the spouse, I think, gets getting a lot of information throughout, and that there's frequency, and then that we can accomplish this by texting or phone, using the phone to keep this person apprised, because there may be some last-minute stuff this person has to do. And similarly, we only have one neighbor here, but essentially you'd have listing out all the neighbors, and they want to be involved in knowing that the property line is assessed properly. Are they going to pay part of the cost? If they are, they're going to probably have higher level of involvement. They'll need to know about any kind of time delays. They need access to, if the builder needs access to the property, and when they're going to be in, and if that's going to be available to them. And so you kind of get the gist here.
Okay, so the next phase is closing. While your project may be complete, that doesn't mean that your work is done. First, you need to do a thorough evaluation of the project, not only of its success on its own merits, but also of the planning and executive process overall. What went well, what was challenging, and what might you do differently were you to do it again? Determine your lessons learned and report them, as well as your successes, of course, but to both your supervisor and your partners. Be sure to celebrate those successes and discuss strategies for managing challenges the next time around. Be sure that you also create some kind of file system that captures all of your information. Make it clear and easy to use so that someone down the road could easily access and understand your work. And don't forget to plan for sustainability. When you are done with your VISTA service, how is the organization going to know what to do if they want to do this project again? So leave detailed instructions for the next person who might take on this type of project.
So we've reached the end of the project. This is a really important step, and I think sometimes, I know this happens with us in my work, is that we feel so tired from the other phases, and we've done it, we're done, and we just want to move on. But power through, and here's a couple tools you can use to make sure that you've not only completed everything that you're supposed to, but that your records are left behind and organized, the sustainability piece that Erin mentioned, and that the contributions of the team are acknowledged and given, and that they're given the okay to work on other projects, that they're sort of released from this, their obligations related to this project. The lessons learned is and I think it's essentially a reflection piece, and this can be done in a lot of different ways, but essentially the lessons learned gathers and documents what went well with the project, what didn't go so well, and what needs to change. It has the goal of ultimately improving the process, the project management process the next time around. So it's a constant iterative process where you're learning things that you can employ later on. And I think that as you're moving through your VISTA year and then onto your career, you'll be gathering pieces of knowledge throughout that you can apply later, and it's just a process of improvement because it's not going to be perfect the first time. It can really, especially when it's fresh in people's mind, you can capture the valuable information that we're still so fresh before they're off to next thing. So you can surface lessons learned in a meeting by inviting everyone who works in the project. It can take many forms, but maybe share some questions ahead of time of the meeting and that people can reflect on and then come prepared to talk about. You can give each person a chance to speak without interruption. You'll want to make sure you have a note taker to take down, like for that documentation process. And then, obviously build in some implementation before your next project so that you can, make sure that you include the things that you learned the next time around. And you know, Erin touched on this a little bit, but you know, sort of a closure checklist, and one of the closure checklist ideas is it's a list of administrative, deliverable, and financial and project documents, archiving activities you'll want to make sure you have done in order to complete the process. So document archiving, there are checklists that include all the documents used in this project. Several of the tools we talked about should be saved and placed somewhere that's accessible. So you'll, you know, most likely have, you know, electronic files. You may have some hard copy files, but make sure that they're able to be accessed by other people. And then, you know, another option is team acknowledgement and celebration. So this is important to, you know, give people their props for what they've done, and, you know, can be done publicly or privately. And, you know, there's many ways to do that. We sometimes at my work, we post on the organization's intranet site to, you know, just acknowledge that what people's done and how they've really made a difference in the work. And just thanking and appreciating our donors and our volunteers is something that we do often, but that we should make it a practice to acknowledge our team members as well and the good work they do. In the case of the fence, making sure everything is cleaned up, payments taken care of, and all the documents are filed in a place where you can access if needed. You can gather the group in your yard with a newly built fence, talk about how it went, have some iced tea, just kind of a closure to the end if you're somebody who's really ambitious with this project and want to kind of close it out right. Okay, so thanks for that, for listening to the main phases. We're going to turn it over to our guest speaker. Dakota is in her second year of VISTA as a social enterprise developer and has been serving with Bethany Christian Services in Grand Rapids, Michigan. While serving, she's also working toward her master's degree in public administration and will be completing her final semester this fall. So we're going to hear from Dakota about her project and some tips she has. So take it away.
Thank you, Bethany, for the introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the work my department has been doing in and with our community. For my VISTA year, I was assigned the lofty goal of starting and building the capacity for a new social enterprise business. The center I work for wanted to create more meaningful ways to develop both the professional and personal skills of local youth, specifically youth in our community who currently are or have experienced homelessness, and youth who are aging out of the foster care system. Many of our youth have limited access to meaningful employment, and even more limited are employment opportunities within their own communities. Our social enterprise, Rising Grinds Cafe, employs, trains, and develops local youth, affirming their abilities and dignity through work. Locally, our cafe is a community-driven coffee shop and deli with visual and performance art spaces. Globally, we focus on ethically sourcing all of our products from farms and organizations who love their communities and environments just as much as we do. In May of 2015, the department brought me and Jamila, the young woman you see pictured in this slide, to the project. And Jamila had graduated from many of the center's programs and, having lived in the community all her life, had invaluable knowledge of what our youth and neighbors wanted to see out of this project. Although we are currently training youth in a small cafe within our center, we are set to open a separate, more permanent site in the spring of 2017. This project has a capital startup budget of over $450,000, most of which has already been raised through grants, and we will continue grant writing in order to sustain the operating expenses for the first 3 years the cafe is in business. So, as Bethany talked about earlier, stakeholders are key to project management. For this project in particular, it was essential that we started by understanding the type of social enterprise our community actually wanted there. Starting a business in a vulnerable community can be difficult, and we knew that if we did not listen closely to the needs and wants of our neighbors, we could inadvertently gentrify the neighborhood we love so much. So working with local nonprofits, we were able to collect data on what enterprises community members were looking for. Along with responses like affordable childcare and a laundromat, community members also expressed the need for more local food or restaurant options. From this data, we were better able to develop a full vision for Rising Grinds Cafe. A little bit of the conversation that's been happening in the chat is how to balance in cultural things, and I think that this is a really good instance of that. Once we had established an idea for the project, we started building our plan slowly. I don't think we realized that this small idea for a quaint coffee shop would become such a huge project. But as more and more people came to our center expressing their interest in the cafe, we realized that our plan needed more structure and more people if we were going to grow with intention. We knew that we needed to step up our process and initiate some structure. After establishing an advisory board for the cafe during the first of this year, we kicked off our strategic planning period. Now that we had individuals within and without the organization who were committed to the cafe's success, we needed to make sure that everyone was being utilized in the best way. During the first portion of the planning period, we broke down objectives and goals into manageable project activities. After placing these activities on a larger timeline, we delegated each to the best team member with the most applicable knowledge and resources. This delegation showed the team where we may have had staffing, knowledge, or even resource gaps that would prevent us from accomplishing certain project activities on time. It was made clear after defining some of these gaps that we would need to hire an expert in restaurant management and a vocational youth trainer if we wanted to make sure our youth training, cafe setup, and partner development activities would be done both successfully and on time. For our entire planning process, we used a living Excel document that was eventually also placed on a timeline for all staff members to visualize where they fit in. Now, in all honesty, our tools for project management have changed about 1 million times. It takes time to know your team members and how they learn or work best. We have worked with Todoist as well as a Gantt chart. Now we have molded a living Excel form into a Gantt chart for overall strategic timelines, and then encouraged other team members to use Todoist for their individual task-oriented timelines. Next slide, please. Thanks. As Aaron stated earlier, there is a constant connection between planning, executing, and monitoring a project. As your project evolves, it is imperative that you are open to change. When you are open to the idea of growing and changing, your project can be more meaningful to those you are serving, more focused on the needs and wants of the people involved. When we started the planning process for our cafe, we were unaware of many of the barriers our youth experienced when entering the workforce. We were also unaware of many elements necessary to starting a specialty coffee shop. As these things came to the surface, it was important that we go back to the drawing board and hash out the facts again. Now that we are in the process of going through the program activities, we established check-in meetings with a variety of team members throughout each month. One useful tool our center and our team have embraced are Kanban boards. These boards, as you see on the slide, are organized into sections titled To Do, Doing, Blocked, and Done. They can be used by individuals and or groups to chart tasks and timelines. Our group used these to visualize the process and allow all team members to update their progress on all tasks. As an AmeriCorps VISTA member, the monitoring and controlling has looked somewhat differently. Besides the normal amount of monitoring the timeline, action steps, and making sure the project is on target, there's an added level of monitoring applicable projects in order to create that capacity. It has been critical that I track practically everything I do and keep a detailed log of the process, so that in the future, the center does not have to recreate these tools, resources, or knowledge I have gained through doing the project and assisting in the project management. Already, I've been able to see the benefits of this process as I have been able to walk new staff members through the history of the project. This allows new staff members to skip much of the beginning barriers and work to accomplish project goals. Since we are still in the process of managing the project, there is still much to learn, and I look forward to carrying out sharing much of what Bethany and Erin have discussed to further the success of my project.
Thank you so much, Dakota. We really appreciate you sharing your insights as well as demonstrating what it looks like when it's applied to VISTA work. So thank you so much for that. We have a few more slides and a few more things to show you, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So stay with us. Overall, we also wanted to point out that there are a few things overall to keep in mind. First, be sure to communicate openly and often. Talk to your supervisor frequently before you get started, at regular intervals during each phase of the project, and when you finish. Make sure that you have that agreement on the timeline, the budget, key deliverables, everything. You're going to experience enough surprises and unexpected challenges while managing a project as it is without them being potentially avoidable from the start. Planning and being prepared for inevitable surprises can make or break your project, so make sure you spend that time there. Also, talk to others who have done similar projects. They might be at your organization, they might be a fellow VISTA somewhere else in the country, they might be at another organization in your community. Ask them about their lessons learned and what you might expect as you get started. And lastly, again, I can't say this enough, always build in extra time. Everything, and I do mean everything, will take longer than you think it will, so be prepared. So thinking about tailoring project management for VISTA service, project management strategies like the ones we've discussed on this call can be used for both short-term and long-term types of projects. I wanted to offer some examples here of the kinds of projects for which you might use these ideas. So for long-term projects, you might create and execute a plan to fundraise, you might build a volunteer program from scratch, or you might launch and lead an outreach effort of some kind. On a shorter-term timeline, you might plan an event, you might design a website, or you might just write one specific grant proposal as part of a larger resource development plan. In each of these scenarios, you can use the 5 phases of traditional project management to prepare for, plan, execute, monitor, and conclude a successful project. So we have time, time for another chat question. What are some examples of short-term or long-term projects that you currently or will, reading the wrong thing. What tools or techniques do you currently use to manage projects? What are some of your, so I've seen a couple people respond. I saw someone use MindNode as a particular mind mapping tool that they've used. Someone else said, oh, I love Kanban boards. Those are great things to use. I'm seeing MS Project, MindMeister, that one I've not heard of. Evernote, Excel. So in the chat window here, please do give us some examples of what you're using. Lots of Google Drives, Google Sheets, pen and paper.
Asana on there, Outlook, Salesforce.
Procrastination not recommended. That is not a great tool. I agree. I've tried that one. It's not effective. America Learns, WebEx. So the reason we want you to list these here is other folks on the call, and I know they're moving quickly because we've got lots of folks here, jot down the ones that sound interesting to you and check them out. There are so many different tools, and we are going to show you a few more in just a moment. But go ahead and jot down some that you might want to check out, because these are all things that you might try. And as Dakota mentioned, you're going to try one, and maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. You may try another. So let's show you a couple examples now.
Yeah, and additionally, each tool sort of has pros and cons, and so you may find, one thing works for one kind of project and another thing where you're maybe working with a bunch of different people works. You might switch to another tool that might work better. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick caveat, we're just showing you a couple examples of tools, but this isn't an endorsement from me as an individual or from the Corporation for National and Community Service for any one of these projects. We need to make that clear. But these are a couple examples of things that you might check out. This first one is called Trello. If folks aren't familiar with Trello, Trello is free, it's web-based. There's a basic version for free, but I've used it myself, and the free version offers quite a bit of functionality. Some project management software sites do require some kind of payment or membership, but we're going to try to show you ones that are free. So Trello, effectively what you have here is drag and drop cards. You create columns, you create cards, and on each card you can set a due date, you can assign it to a team member, and you can drag and drop each one and archive them as you go, as well as use attachments and all other sorts of functionality. So if you're a visual person like I am, something like Trello can be very useful because you can physically see all of the tasks. And it looks very similar to what Dakota was talking about earlier with the boards.
Okay, so this is one that I noticed at least one person in the chat has used Asana. At first I thought it was like a sauna, you know, where you go and it's really hot, but it's not that. So it's another site that has the ability to create and assign tasks to team members, you know, so it gives notifications when things are, you know, done and or when you're assigned something. You can attach files, you can have team conversations in the system. One of my colleagues uses this one more than I do, and when I asked him what he really thought was great about it was that he says this is a great one for collaborating on shared tasks. So when you have a bunch of folks that are working on one project and they, you know, there's several dependencies and it really makes it easy to assign things to people and keep track of when those things are done. So that was his feedback on that. There is a free version of this that allows access to 15 team members and supposedly an unlimited number of tasks, projects, and conversations. So this one might be worth looking into if you're interested. You can do, you can actually use the conversation function or the instant messaging function within the program, or you can, you know, and also have it send you emails to notify you when things are happening. So it's kind of a good way to electronicize some of those things we talked about earlier related to letting people, you know, checking in with people, finding out where people are, giving people nudges. So that's one option.
And another one here is Google Docs. We mentioned this one earlier, and I noticed a lot of folks in the chat did talk about Google. Google Docs is free, of course. It's all under Google Drive. You can use spreadsheets. You can use something akin to a Word doc. And you can customize it to become your own project management software. So this is an example we found on Google Images where they've created a column for their dependent components, for the status, the date it started, the date it was complete, who owns it, the difficulty, notes, and you can color code it, you can drag and drop, move things around. Overall, as a note, each of these tools can be used effectively. It really does just come down to your personal preference. Some people want something very visual. Some people want something that's much more of a list. So it just comes down to what you want to do. So again, we found these examples online. For this particular Google one, I might also add a column for target completion date and actual completion date so that you can actually track your goals versus what actually happens to help you adjust on the fly. But again, just a few to try. So here are some resources overall for you to check out. I don't typically recommend Wikipedia as a source, but they have an excellent section on project management that's really well worth checking out. And it talks about everything from the history to the 5 steps. There's some fantastic data there. You might also check out the resources at the Project Management Institute, although many of them do require a fee to get started, so just keep that in mind. I also found a great article called 51 Training Resources for Project Managers that includes a wealth of links to resources and how-tos on project management. So you want to take a look at that and see if there are some great tips and tools that might work for you as well. I do see that Sam just put all of these links in the chat window, so you can click on those. But again, there will also be a recording of this webinar in just a couple of weeks if you want to come back to these links. We also mentioned some tools and templates. So we've listed those here as well. Some of the ones mentioned by Bethany can be downloaded from the corporate education group that can help you get started planning. And then we also have some links and information on Trello, Asana, Google Docs, and Kanban boards. So you'll be able to see those links as well and make sure that those are live for you. And at this point, we're going to pass it back to Andy and Sam because we're going to take a moment to do evaluation before we shift into questions and answers. So, Andy?
All right, thank you, Erin. So we're going to get to your questions in just a minute, but also before we dive into that, want to hear what you thought about today's presentation. So on the right, you now see our evaluation poll is open. There are 10 questions, so you'll need to use the scroll bar to scroll down and see all questions. And be sure to click the Submit button so that your responses actually get registered with us. So while you're working on that, let's take a look at how you can submit your questions. So you probably noticed just, well, now that the poll is open, the Q&A panel is just above the evaluation poll. You'll need to click the little triangle next to Q&A in order to open it. So you can submit your question there if you haven't already. And I'm going to invite our operator to come back on and give us instructions for asking a question by phone.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question by phone, press star and then 1 and record your name when prompted. Again, if you would like to ask a question by phone, please press star, then 1.
All right, and while we wait for questions on the phone, we've got a couple of them queued up here from the Q&A. So first off, Mia asks, what is the best way to engage your supervisor in project planning when the supervisor is pulled in a million different directions? So I'm going to put that out both to Erin, Emily, and Dakota, I should say all three of you, since you may have different perspectives or different ideas around that. So let's see, Erin, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So that's a great question. All of us have supervisors who are extremely busy. I would say if you know them well, if you know what their particular learning style is, for example, maybe they prefer email, maybe they prefer a piece of paper in their hand, follow that path. If you don't know them well enough, just literally ask. Say, hey, I'm putting together a plan for our project. I really want your approval and your buy-in as well as your thoughts on the process. What's the best way to share it with you? So making sure that it aligns with their particular learning and check-in style. And let's say, for example, they say, you know what, I really need a piece of paper in my hand. So what you can do is plot everything out on a piece of paper, bring it to them and say, I'd like it, let's have as part of our regular check-in meeting, this is where I'm at. Can you read this through and give me your off-the-cuff thoughts? Plan in advance for how they want to be updated. Make sure that they will be updated, but again, recognizing what is their preferred style. Is it email? Is it poking your head in their door? Is it wait for your check-in meeting each week and then just give them an update? But I think the key to it here is acknowledging that because they're very busy and they're pulled in many different directions, you need to fit it into their already very busy agenda. So as much as you can tailor your reporting to them, to their style, I think the more success you're going to have with them being an active participant.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I would add, this is Bethany, is that you want to involve them very early on in the initiating and the planning phases, because you do want to get their buy-in, because you don't want this to be something that you work really hard on and then it doesn't, you know, meet the expectations that's set up with at the beginning. So, I mean, that's the only thing I would add, and I don't know if Dakota has anything to add from her experience, that she's really probably had involvement from her supervisor with her current project.
Yeah, no, I think that you both hit it on the head when you said, you know, getting involvement early, defining communication styles that work best with each supervisor. For my particular project, there were a ton of people involved, and so it really became important for me to be clear and intentional when I asked individuals how exactly they wanted to be involved, how they wanted to be communicated with, and just being very transparent about that process, and especially transparent when I was having issues with maybe a project activity or keeping other team members accountable. I think as a VISTA, that's sometimes the hard part is you know, stepping into that role, and so just making sure that your supervisor, you know, is being clear with you on how they want to be involved with that process. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Next up, Samuel says, I've heard of the critical path method, and he's curious, has anyone used it in project management? If so, how did it work? So is any of you familiar with critical path method of project management? I think it's a particular model within the many different models of project management out there.
Unfortunately, this is Erin. I'm not familiar with it myself. I've primarily used traditional method as my path. Having said that, I would check out the Project Management Institute site to see if they have anything explicitly on that. And I would also open it up for the folks in the chat. If anyone has used it, please feel free to share your experiences. But unfortunately, it's not one that I've used myself.
All right, great. And let's see, Joan says, how can you use these techniques when projects really change?
Well, you know, earlier on in the slideshow, the slide deck, there was a slide that showed the 5 steps, and essentially I'm going to pull mine up here. So, you know, there's the initiating, and then it goes to planning, and then it goes to execution, and then what you're essentially doing, which I think Dakota talked about too, is that there's a constant situation where things are changing, and you're needing to adjust things, and you're needing to monitoring to control. Then you go and try to execute that, and then you go back to planning, and so. It's a little bit of one of my professors once said, you know, nothing ever gets done on time. I mean, there's always changes, and so it's, you know, kind of a matter of just keeping track of things as they change, making a plan to, you know, mitigate that situation, or, you know, and communicate that to people. Because it is going to be, there's a lot of things, and there's sometimes where I have totally forgotten something that I need to add in, and I have to figure out a way to get it done. So, I mean, I think that some of the tools about, I think it's important to use a lot of the tools up front, but also realizing that there's going to be some changes that happen throughout, and you'll need to revisit those things, revisit those tools and processes, and just sort of adjust as you go. I don't know if that answered the question, but
yeah, one thing I might add is if you think about the overall project as a tree, you're starting on one particular branch and heading down that path and saying, okay, this is the path to our particular success, that we're the goal, the vision that we have in mind. And if something shifts and the project suddenly changes very significantly, what's happened is you've gone down a different branch. So you might revisit, okay, let's go back to the initiating, let's go back to the planning. Now that this is something different, what pieces still make sense to carry over, and what pieces do we need to start anew? And if you're using a tool, for example, like Google Docs, and you're using a spreadsheet, it might be that you create a second sheet on that same doc where the first one was the original plan and the second one is the new plan. And it's important to keep that historical data so you know how you got to where you are now, but it may very well be that you need to take a couple steps backwards to reconsider your overall plan because the project itself has shifted.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dakota.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say that I think it's been critical for me as an AmeriCorps to create those living documents so that they can constantly be changing. Even maybe it's not for this project, maybe it's for the next VISTA or the next permanent staff who steps in needing maybe a similar form, but just being prepared in creating those processes that change is inevitable and kind of being intentional about doing that. I think that that's something that's been really important to me as an AmeriCorps, so I know that that might directly apply.
Great. Thank you for all your responses. Let's turn to the phones now and see if we have any callers with questions.
Currently, there are no questions over the phone lines. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then 1.
All right. Well, no worries because we've got a number of other questions lined up here. So let's see, Kayla says, in my project, I am a one-woman show. So how do I organize myself when I can't delegate any of the tasks?
Yeah, that's something I'm very comfortable with. Prior to joining my current position that I just started a month ago, I was a full-time consultant, one-woman show for a couple of years, and have played with many of these different tools to try to organize my time. So when you can't delegate tasks, that means, of course, that everything is on your plate. So it's really a matter of figuring out which tools are going to work best for you to keep track of all of those pieces. One particular time management strategy that was very useful for me that was offered by a colleague was try to schedule things out a little bit so that you don't have the entire to-do list in front of you every day, because that can overwhelm you. And then you might feel like, oh, I never make any progress because I only got half of one item done today. Instead, if you take your entire list, you plot it out over a timeline, and then, as Bethany was saying earlier, week by week, you say, okay, these 5 things are the things I need to get done this week. Then it looks like, oh, 1 thing per day, I can manage that. It's a psychological trick, but boy, does it make a difference in terms of not feeling overwhelmed and like you're drowning under tasks. Figure out which tools work best for you, and keep in mind that even if you are the primary person doing all of the work, there still are other partners with whom you need to bounce ideas, you need to get approval, you need to make sure that what you're designing works for them. All of us are serving diverse communities, so we need to make sure that we aren't operating in a silo in terms of I'm going to determine everything and do everything but not get that feedback and not be communicating with others. So figure out the tools that work best for you to be able to keep your head above water and get things done in a reasonable timeline, but also make sure that you don't allow yourself to get too mired also in your own work so that you don't connect with others, because their feedback is going to be critical. Even if they aren't doing the work, they're going to be able to provide you with context and vision and information that you need in order to succeed. So find what works best for you, and try not to look at the big picture every day. Do a regular check-in on the big picture, but try to break it down into manageable chunks so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming is my core advice.
Good advice. Thank you. So we've gotten several questions that are related, so I'm going to sort of pull these all into one. Jamal phrased it this way: what should I do if I'm being pulled in different directions not directly related to my project? And let's see. Janice says, if you're working for multiple departments, what's the most efficient way to organize the demands without compromising one department's work over another? And then finally, let's see here, it was Delisa who said, do you have tips for managing your project when your supervisor gives you many time-consuming smaller projects? So kind of a related theme there, pulled in many directions, getting additional responsibilities, maybe outside of the original plan, and then how to how to balance competing demands from different departments.
So I'd love to hear from Dakota, but I'm going to offer just a quick 2 cents, which is, to me, this comes down to establishing allies. Because in many of these examples, the directives are coming down from above. If you're getting different tasks from your supervisor than from your supervisor's supervisor, or if other departments are trying to pull you in different directions, when I've been in a similar situation, I went to my direct supervisor and said, here is what I have on my plate, here's what I've been told is the priority, but I'm getting mixed messaging from here or from here, and approaching it very open, not approaching it as a complaint. So you're not going in to say, hey, this sucks, why are they doing this? But instead you're going in to say, look, I'm learning how to best manage my own work, and I could use some guidance here on how to keep all of these plates spinning, and could use your advice on how to best prioritize. So in a way, you're shifting the responsibility to your supervisor to give you some guidance and some directives. And the reason I say that as an ally is because if it's coming from other departments or potentially from their supervisor, it puts them in a position to be able to lobby on your behalf, and then you're not in quite such an awkward position that you're the one saying yes or no to others, but rather they may be able to go to that other department or to their supervisor and say, I can see that that's really important, but right now they need to be working on X, Y, Z, or they might give you some tips and tools that you could also do that, but you'd have their support and their buy-in, so you wouldn't be out there on your own. So I would say in all cases, go to your direct supervisor, have that conversation, and approach it again as, I want to be able to do all of this work well, and I want to be able to put my best foot forward, but I also recognize that there are some conflicts in terms of when things are due and what's prioritized. I could use your guidance. That's my advice.
I agree.
Great.
And Dakota, would you add to that?
Yeah, I really echo a lot of what you just said about going to your direct supervisor and going as an ally. I would just also recommend going and asking your direct supervisor to assist you in prioritizing. Often this calls the direct supervisor in as an advocate so that they can, you know, be at the front lines as well when those other departments might need help, and just also echo your needs of time management and be able to act as a sounding board while you kind of figure out how to time manage. I think that this has probably been the greatest challenge for me as a VISTA because I think when we work on complex projects and with complex programs, often we feel like we're being thrown into this crazy frying pan and trying to decipher what comes first is incredibly difficult. And so it really changed for me when I went to my direct supervisor and just said, hey, can you help me prioritize this, and how do I best communicate with these other departments that these are my priorities, this is maybe what my VAD says. So of course, you know, sometimes those things need to happen first. So definitely using your relationship with your supervisor or even someone else in the department, just making sure that you're capitalizing on those relationships and using them to their full extent so that you really get as much out of this VISTA time as possible.
Great, thanks for those responses. We've got a little bit of time left and still a number of questions here, so we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So Sarah says, how do you start managing a community-driven project that was managed by the community, but then it fizzled out and there's no paper trail? So any thoughts on that kind of scenario?
I would love to.
Yeah, go ahead, Dakota.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I would just love to step in. I think this is something I've been really excited to witness a part of my community and being what we call human-centered design focused. You know, a lot of times with community-driven projects, we need to be aware that if they fizzled out, that might have been for a reason, and just being open to going back to the community, asking why it didn't work, seeing if that is or was an actual need or want of the community members, and just being open to fully changing that pathway. So if there's no paper trail, that's kind of exciting. You can really pave the way and go back to the community members, ask if they want to continue down that road or if they want to be innovative and try something new that they really want to go towards. So that has really been a process of mine, and I'd love to talk with the person who asked that more in the future if they'd be interested.
Great. Well, thank you for that offer. A slightly different type of scenario than the ones we've heard about. Chelsea says, what do you do if your supervisor doesn't give you enough responsibility in projects, even though you want to learn how to effectively plan and implement one?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, one thing you can always try is, so first of all, one thing you can try is to still put together sort of an overall plan and present it to them and say, hey, this is something I've been doing a lot of thinking on. I've done this webinar on project management. It's something I've been putting some extra energy into learning. And I took a first stab at what I think we might want to do collectively. I wanted to share it with you and see what you think. So bringing it to them not as necessarily a, hey, I'm going to do this, but rather this is my contribution to the group effort. Perhaps that will give them some extra confidence that you can take a shot at it to get going. You might also, if there's still resistance, say, I'd love to take on some pieces of this. Is there a particular area or a particular task that you think I might be able to take on? Or even suggest and say, I volunteered with this type of organization before. I feel pretty confident that I could reach out to this organization. Is that something I can go ahead and do? So I would say being proactive in terms of asking for it, which I'm going to guess that you probably have already done, but being very specific as well. Offering them sort of your big, larger vision for the project so that they can see that you understand all of the pieces, you're demonstrating that to them, but then also asking for very specific slices of the pie to take on, and that might help them build that trust and the relationship so that they can start to let go of the reins a little bit and say, yeah, no, they know what they're doing, I can trust them. I also, just as a general advice, I wouldn't take it personal. Some people, it's just tougher for them to let go of control. For some people, they just may not know you very well yet or know what you're capable of. So just try to approach it as an opportunity for you to build trust in a relationship with that person and slowly but surely demonstrate what you're capable of.
And I just want to add just a little thing. I think you guys are probably seeing this too, that, while we're talking about, while we may understand the phases of a project and we may understand how to use some of the tools, there's a lot of other kind of like professional skills that you're employing as project managers or as people who are, getting these things accomplished. There's conversations, there's negotiations, there's, strategic relationships. So, you're kind of really going to be pushing yourself in additional ways when you're working on different projects. So just something to keep in mind that I think it's just a lot of learning, and it's great.
All right, thanks to you both. Let's check the phones one more time and see if we have any questions there.
There are no questions in queue.
Okay, great. Well, we're just about to wrap up. We do have a couple questions. Let's see if we can squeeze these in. Shaban says, besides the traditional methods of project management, are there other methods that we should consider?
Yeah, great question. There are a couple other methods that you might consider. One that's very popular among software developers and those working in the technology field is called Agile. So you can, I'm not going to go too in-depth on any of these, but you can do a quick Google search of the Agile method, A-G-I-L-E. My partner works in technology and uses this tool frequently. A couple others that we came across in our research have really whimsical names like the spiral method and the waterfall method. Again, a quick Google search will give you a sense of what those look like. They use very similar techniques in that you're still going to be thinking about resources and dependencies and timelines, but there are different visual representations and different tools that you might use in order for you to move through the various steps. And different fields have different project management tools that they use more frequently. So, for example, some of those are more common in the construction field, for example. But the traditional method seems to be used quite often in nonprofit work, and that's why we chose that one. So Agile, Waterfall, and Spiral are three of the ones that came up frequently in my research.
Great. And then we've got one more question. Let's see how much we can provide for Sarah, who asks, how do I understand the vision and my community to successfully manage a project when I am so new to the organization and new to the community? I feel like I'm not even ready to begin planning for a project.
Ooh, Dakota, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, Sarah, I think a good thing to know is that you are not alone. I think that's the cornerstone of being a VISTA. You know, I want to go back to what I spoke about before, that really these projects always need to be community-centered. And I think when you're community-centered, that involves a ton of just listening. And acknowledging that you're new to a community is the first step. So I think when I first started, an important activity for me was I spent about the first 60 to 90 days asking who to know, asking where in the community I could go for answers, who in my organization was from the community. You know, that's a great place to start as well. And a great thing to remember is often we VISTAs are moving into these communities. We're starting to rent apartments, and so part of this is just getting to know where you're living, and that's a process. So I think that I would say it's important to just sit back and listen and know that although sometimes VISTAs we have a timeline, but to know that in this beginning process, it's more important to listen and to learn about that vision and to learn about that community than jumping into a project full force, because I think that that's truly where you're going to get your answers, and that's how your project's going to get done. So.
All right. Thank you for that, Dakota. And we are at the end of our time together, so I would like to do a quick wrap-up. And first of all, thank everybody. We had close to 500 people attending this webinar, so thank you all for being here and participating. We really love to see all of your energy and engagement. Especially I want to thank our main presenters, Erin Barnhart and Bethany DeSoblin, for putting together the content and the presentation, and of course to Dakota Reihl, who brought her real live lived VISTA experience of project management, and really a great project that she's got. Of course, we want to invite you to our next webinar, September 8th, on managing student loans. We know many of you have student loans, and so and especially those of you who just started over the summer may want to learn more about strategies for minimizing the burden on you. Those of you who are later in your VISTA service term may be interested to know that we will be hosting a Federal Jobs Expo October 25th here in Washington, D.C. So if you're in the D.C. area or within driving distance, we invite you to that. You'll be getting more details, but just wanted to put it on your radar for now. We'll be doing some related events, including a couple webinars that you'll be able to participate in no matter where you are in the country. If you want to connect with us or connect with any of our presenters, or particularly I saw a couple folks who said, oh, I really want to connect with Dakota, use the email address you see there, vistawebinars@cns.gov, vistawebinars@cns-corporation-for-national-service.gov, and we will put you in touch. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks to Sam Graziani, our producer. I hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll see you again in the future.